All right, folks. So now let's get started. Struppi, go ahead.
Okay, let's go. Wherever this path, this way may take us today. Yeah, as maybe as a beginning, I want to also acknowledge and speak to my gratitude for CJ. I've never really had the chance to get to know him. I think I saw him in a video once before I learned from your meeting that he was ill, and then I'm very sorry to hear that we've lost his presence. But I think in a way, just as with Bucky and so many other minds and souls and hearts, they are living on within us, and probably sitting somewhere just outside of the corners of our eyes, enjoying what we may invoke in their spirit, in their mind. And yes, I'm super excited because I've been playing with the way of the spheres, as I call it, which, you know, Bucky called it synergetics after first calling it the theory of the spheres. So I think it's quite appropriate to move the thing over now from being a theory to something more substantial. And yeah, it's been an incredible time space since I took that turn to the spheres. In many ways, it was very similar to my life before then, because I think I have been looking for this intuitively for a very long time, and in a certain way, I've been incredibly lucky because the people in my life, the human and more than human people in my life, have accommodated and nurtured my sense of play, and whatever weird ways that took at times, it was a continuous process of complementing that sense of learning more about what it is to play by heart, beginning with music and dance, and then growing into capoeira, which is kind of the same thing but a little more integrated perhaps, and then finding out about permaculture. My mind was like beginning to shift into a mode where, rather than seeing problems everywhere, I was seeing more and more of what there was in terms of possibilities around me. So there is a sense of space-time that goes deeper than just what is presently with us, something where we can read the landscape and say, okay, something has been here, I can see the traces of it, and I can see its presence still. Like, I go into a city and I can still feel the forest waiting to return. But I also know that with some shift and change in our mind, we can just grow those forests again, and we are not stuck in this situation that we often feel very, very stuck in. And I think the moment where this all kind of fell into place was when I, out of permaculture thinking, got into a geodesic dome making. And I grew the first of these in my mom's garden from some bamboo sticks that I tied together with string, and doing it all on my own, you know, dancing with this tensegrity, pulling it up, and then trying to get this corner connected, and then I lost something and the whole thing collapsed, and I'm like, oh no, what now? And then I tried doing it over here, getting it up, no way, not over there. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go back to that next corner that I was working on, And as I drew that back together, suddenly it came up into life again. And that moment where it moves from a whole lot of individual members that are growing connected into something that has its own integrity as a whole, has touched me so deeply in that moment, because it was so clear and present. That shift from I had to hold it to it could hold me, which is just a moment. It's not a big shift that you see coming long ago, but it's really from one moment to the next. And I realized at that time that this was not like any of the things I'd been doing so far up to that point, except maybe the dancing and the music, which was much like that. But I felt like this is something that I want to go deeper into, and then I did just that and took a deep dive into Bucky's mind. And I liked what I saw. But I also found that I had no conception. I grew a conception by reading his book and Amy Edmondson's fuller explanation and these things, and watching movie videos and stuff. But I could tell that while all of it made sense on a mental level, I could grasp all of these things, I also sensed that I had no experience with these structures and these bodies. So at that, I kind of asked everyone, whoever maybe heard the invitation, to perhaps prepare for today by getting a few spheres, without really having to clarify what that precisely is by now, but something that is spherical, and maybe a set of them, so that we might be able to play along to a degree. So I've got a lot of them, but I also brought some food which nicely grew in that very way of being spherical. So if you've got something like this with you, or any kind of other spheres, we'll have it a little easier, at least to get a sense of the bodies themselves that goes beyond what my words may tell you, and the screen so flatly shows you on your side of our conversation here. But I am going to speak about spheres and about what I call the spherical thinking and the way of the spheres, which is really a whole lot of stories. So these are the stories of the spheres I want to share with you. And I think there's a growing sense in our collective consciousness that a lot about our lives and our realities is made up of, woven of stories and storylines. And the same is true for our concept of reality, which is woven out of the storylines of what the Greek geometers of ancient times and perhaps their Babylonian predecessors called geometry, which is a set of stories that is so deeply ingrained in our thinking that it simultaneously shapes the very way in which we can make sense of ourselves and of our world around us. And what I'm offering today is my own way of telling these stories. So I learned a lot from Bucky. I think most of what I do has its roots with Bucky, but there's also a lot of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi and Alan Watts and other people present in these thoughts. Also,
let me say one thing, Struppi.
Yes,
I mean,
please.
this is something that CJ was very big on. This series is about Bucky Inspired.
Indeed.
And the only way to actually be inspired by him in a very deep way is to integrate his ideas with everything that you think. So
Yes.
it is going to be combinations of many things. So wonderful. Please go on. Feel free to express anything you want to express. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I have brought a lot of my little friends here, all kinds of these structures and shapes that we might along the way pass by and take a look at, because all of them tell us something. And that's also something I want to say to begin with, is that since these are stories, this is not a situation as if we were in school and I was teaching anything. I'm not teaching, I'm just telling the stories and invite everyone to follow along and take what integrates with your mind and your self, without having the sense that you need to hold on to something or you need to grasp the whole thing or whatever. It's a vast thing and it's impossible to grasp at once at all. Also, it's possible to grasp at once at all, but it's a very small thing, right? A very small bit of this, a small piece of this story, and contains the whole. And that's the beauty of it, because whatever you feel drawn to, whatever one feels drawn to, draws back, and we draw together, and then we gather and gather and gather ever deeper understandings and inner standings of what this all is about. And maybe to begin with, I'm gonna today try a direction which I have not used so often to tell the stories, but I think it is appropriate because it sort of begins with the whole in a very beautiful way and shows a lot of what this can go into, while also just being a little dance. And from there we can go along step by step, so to speak. But the thing I want to begin with is this one, this structure here. And you can see how it shifts and moves. It kind of dances from this to that, like so. And what you have in front of you, what we have in between us now, is basically just a set of paper straws, maybe with some sticks in there when I bent the straws to repair them a little. There's a string running through them, and the inner bit with the colored straws is a second bit that has these little wooden beads that sit on the corners there. And they will come to play in a minute. But first, just see how this moves. And let me tell you the name of this in Bucky's terminology, in his language of synergetics. This would be called the vector equilibrium, or much earlier in his life he called it the dimexion, when he came around that name, and before that he called it 4D. We could call it I used to call it the mother of all sphere. I've moved a little past that for some reasons, but I've learned since then that one very beautiful name for it, which will reveal more and more of its sense to us as we go along, is the 2 dozen 8 eyes, or Tao dozen 8 eyes, because this is really the geometry of the Tao. Now that's a big statement, I know, because as Lao Tzu points out, it's very hard to grasp the whole thing in words in particular, but it's not impossible as long as we keep in mind that the whole is always more than what we can speak to in words. There's of course way more to this than what I'm able to tell you now or show you now, but even just what this can show on its own is going to show us quite a lot, because what we have here is essentially a sphere. However, the sphere is not static, as we would think of it in Greek terms, but this is a dynamic one. It's actually alive and breathing, and it can shapeshift and contract into this, among other things, which some of you may recognize as the 8 eyes. If not, we'll get back to that. And you might see that the inner fingers, as I call them, the vectors in here, the inner straws, are now collected in a way that is reminiscent of what we call the XYZ coordinates. So it looks like the 3-dimensional framework that we're used to, except that it's not thought of as a cube around the thing, but an 8 eyes. And also, all of those vectors are doubled, because when it expands again, there's a dozen vectors that go out of that center, of that nuclear center, that heart of this sphere, which is also its center of gravity. And these radii go out to a dozen spheres around the membrane of this structure. And if I was to find one, I think here's a small one. Let's take that. If we look at this, this would be the dozen around one spheres. So this is essentially exactly the same structure, just looked at in a different way. And it's very tiny. I'm sorry, I might have bigger ones, but there's a lot of them around. By the way, I really liked the thinking around the orbs that you brought up recently, Shrikant, because we could call it the dozen around one orb. Focusing on those spheres, which aren't really visible here right now, unless we're already somewhat familiar with spherical thinking. Then it's clear that there's a lot of spheres at play in this. But right now, it may seem a little abstract because we're not yet used to seeing them. But believe me, there is nothing abstract about this whatsoever. And now, I said this is the dance of, this is the geometry of the Tao, the 2 dozen 8 eyes, the Tao dozen 8 eyes, and it can show us a lot more about what it can be or what it means to be a sphere when we do take out the nucleus. So if I disconnect these little beads in the ends of those straws, I call them fingertips because I call them the straw's fingers. Taking those out, we sort of release our nucleus here, and it becomes something reminiscent of a seed, like a dandelion seed drifting off somewhere, taking root probably, leaving us with the membrane. And now let's just look at what this membrane can do without the nucleus, because it can dance a lot more than with it. So this was more or less the extent it had with the nucleus. And this was when I could contracted it. And it can go 2 ways, either one, because you see the vector equilibrium, as Bucky called it, speaks to equilibrium, to balance. And balance is something that cannot be static. It's something that moves in between 2 extremes, if you like, or 2 poles, but it's always the same whole thing that moves. And the same is true for this. So it does move one way and the other, and contracts into the 8 eyes. From there, we can turn it a little and get this, which may not say much to you right now, but maybe later you will see what it is. And then we go down in here and we get 4 eyes, 2-frequency triangle, as I would call it, which now can fold like so. and become the four eyes that some of you have now been looking into a little, because we've the meeting that I got to meet you all was on the topic of the so-called tetrahedron, which again is the Greek term for an idea which looks superficially as this structure does, although in my mind there is a significant difference between a tetrahedron and a four eyes, because one is an abstraction and the other isn't. So bear with me if I speak maybe words that are a little unfamiliar to you for now, of eyes and fingers and hearts and bodies and membranes and members and all these things, but I have good reason to do so. And experience tells me that speaking in this way of these things allows for a deeper sense of integrity within it. It allows us more to grasp the simplicity of these things, rather than to be stuck in things we think we know, but maybe don't so real. Yes, so the four eyes. But since space-time, what we're playing with here, has two sides, an inside and an outside, this can actually turn around and fold inside out, which is very nice. And then it can also fold all the way down into a single eye, albeit a very multivalent, polyvalent eye. Yes, so all of these shapes that we've seen now are already contained in every triangle. And as a triangle unfolds, it becomes clear that it is really not a uniform which we can unfold in all ways, and it always remains the same as we are so used to from the square thinking. But actually this is a polyform. So even just here with the first unfolding of this eye into a pair of eyes, we have polyformity. It goes two ways, and that's a quality of space-time that is ever present and just continues in levels and levels and levels of depth onwards to, well, really to speak the whole stories of the spheres, it takes the whole of universe and all that is ever gonna happen in it and has happened in it before. So those are a few of these structures, but there was one along the way which I can hold somewhat like this. I can hold the dance in this position. And if I don't want to hold it there, I can get a hold of another one of my little friends here. Here's one. I tied them together to have them at the ready, and they didn't want to stay that way. So we're gonna need 6 of these little ones. 6, yes. So this is just the same thing again. These are straws with beads on the ends and a line running through them. And by adding them into this very, very much dancing and dynamic membrane here, and I hope it will do the trick today, because it's a little loose. It's come into age, and the tension of the line has dissipated a bit. So it's all a little loose, but it should work anyways. So I'm adding these other branches in. And what happens because of that is that I am omni-triangulating this structure. That's one of Bucky's finest words, omni-triangulation. And if there's one thing we can say for certain about universe, it is that the universe is omni-triangulated. Everything that is triangular on one level or another. And now I'm all the way to having only one more connection to put in. And then I've added these 6 fingers to the dance of the Tao. And we get another one of those of the family of spheres, the third one of the simple structures that come with space-time. We have the small one, the 4 eyes. We have the 8 eyes in the middle, and then we have the dozen 8 eyes. And this now is, again, a completely triangulated membrane. So it is able to hold its shape, but it's holding it, right? It's not stuck in that shape, but it's really actively holding it, because every member of the structure is still in movement. It's just in unison with the whole. And that is maybe a way to introduce everyone to maybe an overview of the integrity of the way of the spheres, the polyformity of it, the multiforms of spheres, because a sphere doesn't just come in one shape. And it might open our minds to appreciate that all of these spheres are really the same. It's the same electromagnetic wave pattern, contracting and radiating and emanating out again. And yes, I think that's maybe a good place to begin today, to look into them.
Wonderful. Struppi, this is just incredible. This is just amazing. Beautifully done. This is just, I am just completely blown away by this. It's fantastic start. Fantastic start. I love it because you kind of nailed this down. I love the dance of the Tao. I love everything. So thank you so much. Please, how would you like to proceed?
Well, maybe just two more sentiments to this before we move on, because one thing is that how there is so many mythological and spiritual ways of knowing that have been passed down through storylines from very old days ago. And one of them that I think we can also sort of identify with this, even though we might not have done that before, is that the Buddha, Gautama, spoke of the Eightfold Path. So if we just take out these little sticks again that I put in there, getting down again from the dozen 8 eyes to this membrane, we notice that it is really 8 eyes. It's 8 triangles, and they like to fold. So that's one of those little connections that I think are maybe just nice to contemplate every now and then, of how maybe on a level, whether they know it or not, these ancient lores speak of these things in their own ways. And if this is the Eightfold Path, what does that say? I don't know. But maybe there is something there. And the other thing I want to mention, because we are speaking Bucky here, I call this the dance of the Tao. Bucky called it the Jitterbug. So if you want to learn about what Bucky had to say about this, he would have called it the Jitterbug, after a popular dance in Turtle Island, or so-called United States of America, somewhere in the early 20th century. So I thought I'd mention that so we know what we're speaking to.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So now, how do we go from here? Is there somebody who really wants to speak their mind or ask something, or do we want to just see what the spheres tell us?
Okay. Does anybody have any quick comments or questions? So you can do quick comments or questions. Go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. If you'd like to make quick comments or questions. I'll give about 10-15 seconds, and then we'll proceed. Evanique says it's amazing. Richard, go ahead.
Yes. Again, thank you, Struppi, for that kind of modeling. And it reminds me of, I had an academic appointment at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay in the mid-90s. And I had the Jitterbug with colored dowels, and I had a tetrahedron with its elastic sort of connectors. And I would share it with students and say, what do these things communicate to you? And most of them would say the Jitterbug is what they really liked, because it was flexible and it was colorful and so forth. And then they didn't like the tetrahedron because it looked too stiff and solid, or like rigid. And I was using the four eyes kind of concept without really knowing it. And so then we ended up being able to compare. The Jitterbug was the idea of a non-government organization, NGOs. They have flexibility, they can do things. The other one reflected the government bureaucracy, if you want. It was rigid and so forth. Then the students realized that, oh, wait a minute, that Jitterbug won't stand still. And sometimes you need stability in your life. And so eventually they combined the two to realize that stability and flexibility are yings and yangs. They're complementary. You can't have one without the other. And so it was a beautiful sort of experiential discovery by the students as they thought about whether or not those models communicated anything to them.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Next up is going to be Steve, Joe, and Rupali. Steve.
I just have to find all my buttons. Can I share a screen?
Give me just a second. Hold on.
While you're finding that, Struppi, I appreciate.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I appreciate, Struppi, what you shared. I've gone through and made a major study of that Jitterbug. I've actually scripted out the video, broken down everything Bucky said, because this thing totally bedazzled me. He starts with the cube octahedron. You had several other names for that. I found referring to the standard geometric shapes as much as possible is helpful. And this cube octahedron goes through different stages. And I'd be glad to make this available. Here's the actual script. I transcribed it, and some of Bucky's words are impossible to understand. He's kind of slurs and kind of goes at 90 miles an hour. Struppi, the other night you said something really powerful, is that Bucky seemed to be in a conversation with himself and the universe constantly. So he constantly changed his words. And it just drove me, as I read synergetics and cosmography, it like blows my mind, because he's referring to something that he's already referred to, but he gave it a different name. And so I really appreciate your willingness and ability to explore it. Yet I find it's very helpful to come back to exactly what goes on. I'll send this to you, Shrikant, and you can stick it in there if you care to. This talks about vector equilibrium. It shows how things twist around, just like Struppi showed. And then we finally come up with that weird shape, that figure 6, which is the icosahedron, which is profound. Bucky called these diamonds and ridge diamonds. In other words, when the square collapses, it collapses into a diamond. And then just like Struppi put in those extra straws, that's exactly what Bucky conceptualized when he created the ridged diamond. And the ridged diamond is now 2 triangles, or if that's actually a 3D structure, that's an octahedron. We're just looking at one side of an octahedron there. And so this really helps. If somebody wants to get through, I mean, I broke it down word for word. I have a couple of questions here. What the hell is he talking about? And maybe some of you can review the script and clarify it for me. But this is part of my journey as understanding the jitterbug and the different structures that he creates there and the different number of faces. Struppi calls these eyes. Bucky called them faces. And Struppi calls them fingers. Bucky called them vectors or edges. And I like the way Struppi has brought it into his own vernacular. So he has a grip on it, because one of the things that's hard to do is to get Bucky in the living room. He's in the cosmos, right? So I'll send this to you, and perhaps it'll be helpful to others.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate this.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you can go ahead and email it to me, and I will send it in the chat. All right, wonderful. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Rupali. Joe.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, this is the thing that's so beautiful about this is that, and Struppi had already mentioned it, is that you start to see possibilities instead of seeing just problems. And so when I've actually started playing a little bit with magnets, and they've been what has been revealing to me is, oh, I didn't know I could make this connection the way I did in order to make it stable. And so in seeing those, just going through that type of thinking, you can start to apply it to every part of your life. You can start to see that how you need to be able to think a little bit differently than what is just in front of you. And I think that that's what playing with these diagrams, and I like to call it playing, and understanding the tetrahedron, the icosahedron, how they interact and how these connections interact with one another. That's what it really opens your mind to, is that when you're done, you feel kind of liberated in a way. So it's no, and I thought that Struppi's example of the Tao was fabulous as well, because that actually brings a whole new perspective to me when I'm thinking about the Tao, which we may be covering again at some point. So thank you everyone.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Rupali. I was playing, Rupali and I were playing with spheres and connecting them up in various ways as a way of celebrating, bringing in the new year. So Rupali, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for welcoming me. Struppi, this was wonderful. I felt like I was in a Montessori classroom. This is how Montessori teachers teach. They teach with a story. They don't teach a lesson, they tell a story. And they play with materials. And that's exactly how I felt while I was watching you. I was very intrigued by your story of the bamboo sticks in your mom's garden. What our students, so I run a Montessori school, and we build geodesic domes for summer camps. And the way we do them is by rolling newspaper into rods. And then the children just use tape to connect the rods to each other. And I just let them play. I don't even tell them that we are building a geodesic dome. They first roll the rods, then they connect the rods to form triangles. And then they're really surprised that that triangle stays. And then they build as many rods as they want. And then they start putting these triangles together. And voila, suddenly they have a tetrahedron. And then they can climb into the tetrahedron. And that's their cave. And you can see, children at play, because that's what these triangles do. They allow children to play. And then suddenly somebody says, okay, I'm going to make a bigger structure. And then they build, a bigger structure. And slowly they come to a dome, and then they wrap it with whatever material they want, maybe bed sheets or tissue paper or something. And they just have a lot of fun inside their own dome that they've created. Children in kindergarten can build these domes. And as an architect in my previous life, I built geodesic domes for people to inhabit as a farmhouse or a house for themselves. And it's just wonderful how this geometry is so accessible to anyone and everyone who wants to play. So Struppi, thank you for sharing that story. I just enjoyed it. And the connection to Tao, I think there's just so much to learn. You got us started on a wonderful journey through stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Joe.
Just one quick thing that I wanted to add, that the more you kind of play around with these shapes and structures, you can start to see what the minimal structure is. And that's something that's very powerful, because then you can only see what you only need. And that saves energy and time and allows you to actually, to think about things in a very efficient, in a very effective, not efficient, in a very effective way. So that's one of the really, really interesting things. And to see Struppi be able to move them around so quickly is actually, that's just a treat, because then that's something that you can start to see the patterns emerge from that. And what's the minimal pattern? That's a powerful, that gets to ephemeralization and some other concepts that Bucky talked about that are really, really important for us to explore in everyday life.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Struppi. So Struppi and I have been playing with a couple other folks here for the last couple of years, and he's just been a ray finder, right? That's his own word of how to live through this kind of spherical thinking. And Struppi, not knowing how much time you have left, but my question to you is, where does this take us, this spherical thinking? And why do you hold that so dear to your heart?
Go ahead, Struppi.
Oh, well, in a way, you answered your own question, because where this takes us is back to our heart. Because with it comes a realization that, contrary to what we've been taught to believe, of all these storylines of separation and disturbance and disintegration, we're all one. We're universe. That is our common identity. And, before I got on this call today, we were playing around a little with a new beamer we got, the projector, projecting, the views of the new JWST telescope onto our kitchen wall, and I was playing a little with the stars in there. And before that, we watched a video of animations of them. They call them molecular machines, right? The tiniest little members of our cells that are playing around with the wave of the spheres without ever taking a break. And it's mind-boggling, the pace at which they play, the ways in which they do it, because it's the level of complexity that is at play in every one of us at every given moment of our lives is almost incomprehensible. However, all of that is the same stuff that I'm playing with here, just taken up to, the kinds of levels that one can get to after a few billion years of playing around with that. And so I think, or I feel that what this really can bring us to is back to our own senses, back to our own self, which is more than what this skin encapsulated ego kind of idea has us believe, because our whole self is both our inside and outside. And it's not complicated to play with these things, right? There might be complexity in it, but not in a way of being complicated. And I think Rupali spoke to this with the kids. Kids are great at this because they have not yet been conditioned to believe only in one set of rules and way, but they are open to, you know, put these things together and whoa, this triangle, there's something about it. It's holding this shape for whatever reason. And then we add triangles to it and it goes anywhere, right? So my invitation with this is, as always, that rather than going back to square one as we run into a wall of an obstacle, a problem of some sorts, we recognize that before that is a triangle. And actually, to have square one, we at least need 2 triangles, if not more, to manifest that. And rather than ignoring that and abstracting away from that all the time, focusing in on that and just playing with that, because it's got integrity in itself. There is nothing we need to add to it or force it to for these things to come to life. And with that, maybe we come back to our own aliveness also, in a way that we're not, I'm not saying anyone is not alive, it's just where the things that we believe in, these mental frameworks, these constructs, they are lifeless. And that is also why I will not speak of any polyhedra today, neither of the tetrahedron or the octahedron, the icosahedron, the cuboctahedron, or any one else of those, because they are lifeless solids grown out of a complicated, convoluted story of abstractions, of points without expanse, points without body, lines that divide rather than connect, surfaces of no thickness and no thingness to them, and then growing those into the so-called solids. And ironically, every time somebody talks about the so-called Platonic solids, you know, that famous set of shapes that is at the very heart of our science also, but also the very way we've been made to think in terms of 3-dimensional realities. Those solids, you know, when they are introduced to people and they say, here's a tetrahedron and the octahedron, and then there's the icosahedron and the pentagonal dodecahedron and the hexahedron or the cube, and everyone goes like, this is the one we know. We're familiar with this one. But I don't think we are. We're familiar with that lifeless abstract concept, but not so many people have ever seen that in this way, where, oh wow, how is that a shape? How is this a solid? Something isn't adding up here. And, you know, conceptualizing and normalizing everything about our lives in terms of this framework is not without consequence. It very much leads, in my mind, to the very problems that we're facing as a community of life on this place, this planet. Bucky spoke of spaceship Earth. I'd rather call it the kinship Earth, because we're not astronauts, we're kin with all the earthen beings and all the winged and the furry and the scaled and the slithering and the slowly growing and the fast blowing, and all of them are kin of us. And I don't think they ever forgot that they are kin. It's us who've been caught in a way of looking at things which does not allow to see what is in front of our eyes. And to go back to this comment about Bucky calling these faces and then shifting his language again and again, this notion of a face, a surface, if you like, a surface is nothing but a lot of eyes. So if I have something like this here, these are 4 eyes, but higher frequencies. And you can see how something that, if I only had one of them, every eye of it would be very dominant and it would be a big opening relative to that little structure here. However, the whole thing feels a lot more like it has a surface, and even more so when the frequency is increased. And this is molecular geometry, if you like, on a level where we can still put our finger through. It's much harder when it's like, you know, atom scale and those things, and up to a point where we begin to see them with our eyes. They're already so incredibly high frequency that we will not be able to put our fingers through those eyes, or let alone air or water. So they're tight to that. But there's still eyes there. The eyes are everywhere, and the universe is a very beautiful, interrelated and intercomplementary system of bodies, of many, many eyes. And if we do find on our mesocosmic scale, where, you know, we can take things into our hands and perceive them with our senses, if we do find something that appears to be the shape of a cube, as maybe a pirate crystal or salt crystal or wombat shit or 1 or 2 radiolaria, or not really that much more than that, turns out, if we do find those, they are still many-eyed spherical complexes. It's just that these spheres collect in a way that they look to our unaided eyes as a cube. But it's not this kind of cube. It's a triangulated cube. And if we want to save this from ever moving, why would we? Let it run free, let it transform, because maybe we find that this way, for instance, I can hold it in one corner and it remains, and I could go and fold it and have again our one eye here. Yes, the camera. We can have it 4 eyes, and it's a shape. We can even have it be a pair of 4 eyes, like so. But not that cube. If we want this to be a cube, we need more, and we're gonna get there in a little while. But maybe now,
let's do one thing,
yes.
Struppi. There are 2 more
Yes.
questions.
Please.
Yasuhiko followed by Richard, and then we'll continue. Yasuhiko, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant and Joe, for your invitation. This is really exciting. Like for almost 30 years, I have not been with people who have studied Bucky Fuller. You know, between the age of 29 and 35, I was into Bucky Fuller. I attended Amy's presentation of Bucky's film, 80-hour film, Everything I Know. And I was invited to Allegra, the Bucky's daughter's home. It was an amazing experience, memory. And now I'm coming back to this and being with my kindred spirit. It's really, really amazing. And I will make sure I will attend every session. I don't know if I have time to reread the books, but anyway, I will attend. Now, this presentation,
Struppi.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was actually mesmerized by your presentation. And I translated Lao Tzu's book into English, and so Taoism is very much there to me. And I can juxtapose Bucky, Lao Tzu, William Blake, Walter Russell, and George Gurdjieff, and many others, and see this whole same eternally regenerative principles expressed in a different ways. It's beautiful, and that I don't try to integrate them. I just be with this amazing mountains, high mountains, and just be there. And what I liked about your presentation is your renaming of those abstract concepts. And as you may know, I think you have somebody talking about William Blake and
Yes.
Bucky next week. Yeah, that's very interesting, because William Blake was very critical of Newtonian and, by inference, Cartesian physics and science. And one aspect of that criticism was the abstraction. And he actually reversed all the concept. So for him, what Bucky Fuller calls the eternally regenerative principles are minute particulars. And Struppi's presentation really reminded me of William Blake's way of actually capturing that which is eternal, equal to or equivalent to minute particulars. That's number one. And number two, what is so important in the way he presented, he is presenting a way of thinking which we have lost. He called this spherical thinking. You see, ontologically and epistemologically, whole comes before parts. And in the last 300 years, we have gone all the way into the parts. And they want to rebuild the whole from the parts, which is impossible. And also this strange notion of building block of the universe. There was a psychologist, James Gibson, who have done 40 years of experimental study of human cognition. And he came to actually affirm naive realism. What they exist the way it is, basically. So he basically destroyed Cartesian, Newtonian, Lockean, Humean, and Kantian epistemology from the very, very fundamental experimental basis. And he has shown that perception of the whole is prior to the perception of the parts. And what Struppi showed us is and Bucky's way of saying is going back and forth. You see, Lao Tzu shows us, the seeing the whole, and start to see. Now, Fuller, Bucky, and Struppi showed us both going both ways. It is breathing in, breathing out. Meditation. This movement, and this is a natural way of our human existence and cognition. And Rupari teaching children this, and they learn to develop their thinking ability in a natural way, not an artificial way that we have been taught in school. So as a philosophical person, I'm always interested in thinking. And what Struppi is showing us is not a new way, it's a new way in a way, in the sense, but it is like more new way in the sense of or the moribund way of thinking. We need to leave and begin to think in the way that our intelligence is actually naturally created. And so it was quite remarkable. Thank you very much. One more thing.
Please.
And this omni triangulation, this is throughout the whole history. That has been the case. And you're in my program, and I'm teaching Gurdjieff, and Gurdjieff called it, Riyamazi Kamno, law of three.
Mm-hmm.
And William Blake, fourfold vision is also, it is indicating of the Buckminster Fuller of thinking. And this, getting this abstract concept, I personally like abstract words, actually, because the sounds, it has the sound, omni triangulation, vector equilibrium. Beyond the concept, there's a sound. And I have a mental orgasm when I read Buckminster Fuller. And the music behind his words has something beyond abstraction. And that is also an amazing thing about his way of thinking. But renaming those in the way that Struppi did it has a tremendous value. So you begin to feel, you begin to intuit, and you begin to really have the experience. And that experience is what Buckminster Fuller calls the raw material of science, which goes beyond the physics and metaphysics. There's no such thing as a building block of the universe or building block of anything. So this is amazing, amazing, amazing project that we have embarked upon. And thank you so much for your invitation.
Well, thank you, Yasuhiko, for coming. Really appreciate that, and just love the comments. Next up is Richard. Richard, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I was picking up on the language of the Platonic solid language and what Struppi is getting at in terms of the concerns. We all know that Bucky was also preoccupied with correct language. And so one of his nemesis has always been the language of sunset and sunrise, to perpetuate the idea that the sun is doing the moving and not the earth. My pet peeve has to do with solidarity. And whenever we have a movement of some kind and we want to show that we're all working together in a kind of a network kind of way, we refer to it as solidarity. And solidarity reinforces the kinds of things that Struppi was talking about. And so we keep being stuck into that old science way of thinking. And he's talking about fingers and eyes. I talk about wireframes, so that we don't talk about solids, the Platonic solids. We can talk about Platonic wireframes. It's kind of interesting. My idea of wireframe also affiliates with glasses. So I'm talking about wireframe glasses to look through the eyes, or to accentuate the eyes that Struppi is talking about, so that we don't see it in the solids. We see the edges and how they connect and interconnect between the points. And instead of turning everything into the notion of solids or entities, we miss out on the relational tensions between these that can be strong, weak, and dynamic. So it's, if I could get the world to change from solid to something like network or to wireframe, that would be a big accomplishment.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Stephen. Evanique.
Thank you so much for this presentation, by the way. This has been an amazing time. I have a question. So if you don't understand what I'm about to say, please ask for clarification. So my question is, how do we overcome our thinking? Example, thinking the way we were taught in like traditional learning, in order to open our mind to understand this way of thinking?
Go ahead, Struppi.
Well, that's really the next leg of the next storyline that I'd like to share with you, which is just something where I would like all of us to have, if we do, some spheres around.
Let's do one thing.
But before, yes,
Struppi, don't worry about the time.
Oh, that's good.
You can come back as many times as you want. You can continue as long as we want. Doesn't matter. So let's go to Stephen, and then we will go to this next session.
Yes,
Stephen,
will do.
I want to make sure that everybody can engage, because everybody is saying so many amazing things.
Indeed.
I want to make sure
Absolutely.
that is
just one notion then, just as an immediate reply to Evanique. It is very, very easy to not follow the path that we've been taught, but find a new one. So easy indeed that the disclaimer in the beginning of Synergetics that Bucky wrote in the very beginning is dare to be naive, because this is so simple. It seems like child play. It feels like something that is absolutely irrelevant to the utter complexity of our constructs that we find ourselves in. Yet it is the very simplicity of this that makes it so profound in the way that it shifts everything about our experiences and being. And one last, just because the fingers came up, one of the things that naming the vectors, as Bucky calls them, fingers, because they are pointing at these hearts and opening those eyes. One of the things that taught me was to realize that if I'm pointing my finger one way, I'm actually pointing it two ways. It's always, every finger is pointing two ways. And I think that's one of the many ways in which this very much central mantra of synergetics rings true, that indeed unity is plural and at minimum two. And I think even just on that, there's way too many things we can go into, but we will take a look at that shortly.
Wonderful. Struppi, I have to tell you a little story here. I was telling my, referring to this childlike, I called my dad and mom and said, I'm going shopping. So they were really aghast. You're going shopping? It was the same reaction of Rupali. It's like, what's wrong? What has happened? So I said, no. I'm going to shop for these spheres. I want to look for the right material and I want the right shape. I want to look for, so I'm going to go shopping. So my dad makes this comment. She says, you used to be interested in computers and then you got interested in these tetrahedrons. Now you're interested in balls? You're getting younger and younger. So anyway, next up is going to be Stephen.
Thank you. So Struppi and I met through the Buckminster Fuller Institute. I joined a TrimTab Space Camp early in 2020, and then got the opportunity to become part of the Design Science Studio. And so Struppi and I have had a chance to play a lot together. Very often we have these meetings on Monday mornings called Fuller Moon Days. And so I got out of, I started creating these faces. the Platonic solids, and then Struppi was showing me, well, there's another way to make these structures, and so this has been a lot of fun learning Struppi's techniques about just using paper straws and strings just to create these little tensegrity structures. And I wanted to challenge myself to see how big I could get with these things. So it's been a lot of fun. But I've also been inspired to start going beyond that as I'm thinking through, like, in the way that we think about physics and metaphysics, and then even going beyond that to the pataphysics. And so I've dropped in some links to, or a link to an article that I recently wrote. But another, if I can just share my screen.
Sure. Give me.
Oh, it's disabled. Sorry.
No. Give me a second. Let me go ahead and your co-host so you can do that. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Here's a way that I'm thinking of another way of conceiving of a tetrahedron or a four eyes. And I just came to the realization that, oh, it actually does look like I'm looking into the eye, except the eye is reversed as I'm looking into the eye of the sun. But this is meant to, the iris is essentially created by these cycles of the earth and the moon, as the moon is creating a kind of a sine wave in a circular form as it's going through the cycle. So this is a calendar that I just created over the last week that starts from the winter solstice and then moves around, marking the weeks as every Sunday are marked around the scale of the let's call it the membrane of this particular sphere, and so this was a way for me to be able to get closer to the bodies of the sun and the moon and the earth, and recognizing that I form a fourth node in this perspective. And so as I'm looking into this eye, what we often forget within the way that we've been often trained to see an image is to forget that we're part of that image, because we're forming that fourth node in the tetrahedron of how we recognize space on a flat plane. So the Renaissance frame then grows into the sphere that we're a part of. And I think that's the growing sense that we have at this time of how we're actually recognizing we're integrated into all of this, and this Renaissance frame of the static flat image is now being enlarged, and it's growing our sense of how we're playing with space-time, as Struppi likes to call this experience of the Tao that we're in. So that's all I wanted to share.
Stephen, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you. Struppi, go ahead now.
Okay. Thank you all for the feedback and the resonance. I think this is really where the playing by heart can take us to places that we never know before we go, right? And it is in this back and forth, I believe, that Bucky came up with what we now know as synergetics. And it is also really the way that indigenous wisdom and just really the way that universe, in the terminology of the Tao, in the Chinese language, the word for nature, whatever that, I don't speak of nature anymore. For me, that is universe. it includes us. But the name for it in Chinese would be Ziran or something like that. I'm I don't speak Chinese, but it sounds a bit like that, and it means as much as it is of itself so. Right? And that is an organic perspective on universe. So rather than looking at this whole experience as a complex of mechanics and machines as the molecular machines, we recognize that it's a bit weird that our machines are mechanical and not organic. And I'm pretty sure that we will move beyond that very soon. We will get to a place where machines come to life, and we will stop looking at ourselves and our bodies and our kin as these machines with their input and output and whatever. There's a lot of terminology so steep and loaded with a baggage that keeps us always at distance from our very intimate interrelationship with all of this, that I think we can just move beyond. And one way of doing that is I've come to speak, as you may have noticed, of membranes rather than surfaces, because a membrane is something that is actively membered, and those who member the membrane are members, right? So rather than thinking of a whole and then looking for its parts, there is no parts in universe unless we take something apart. However, universe is membered. It's a membership, right? And we're members just as everyone else. So with that, let us now member some space-time. Maybe
Wonderful.
it reminds
Struppy,
us.
I just wanted
Yes.
to tell you that please take your time. Okay, please take
I
your
am.
time. This is a beautiful process. Everybody is loving, I'm loving what you're saying. Everybody is loving what you're saying. Everybody is getting so much from it. Don't hurry at all. You have plenty of time. You have hours and hours to do this. So just go ahead and make, proceed in the way you think is the right way to proceed. Go ahead. All
right, let's do that then, because that's one of the things that I love so much about this group, the 4004 living ideas, is that you actually create places where we can member, where we can meet and see eye to eye and speak our mind without having to think of a deadline that's fast approaching to cut us down or whatever. So without that, I will probably take a leave every now and then because I keep drinking, and you know how the river runs.
Please feel free to do that. It's part of nature.
Indeed, but not for a few minutes. But now let's do this thing where we look at what is a sphere, because in the end that's a central question to ask in any case, and in particular if we're speaking of spherical thinking, because we do have an idea of what a sphere is. We think of that ball shape, and the concept of a sphere is again a geometric one, which is therefore coming from the tradition of ancient Greek geometry. And that is a lifeless sphere, one that has a surface of an infinite number of points, all at exactly the same distance from their center of gravity. And there is no gaps in that sphere. There is no holes in that. There is no way inside and outside could interchange and breathe. So as Bucky was very, very vocal, there is no such thing as that sphere. And once we have that agreed upon, we can look at, well, what is a sphere then? And the way that I would answer that question is that a sphere is at least, at minimum, if you like, it is a membrane which is binding together. A boundary is binding inside of the sphere with outside of the sphere. Those are the two sides of the sphere, and they are both members of the whole sphere, right? We cannot only look at the inside of this and ignore the outside, thinking it's not there. I mean, we could, we've been doing that for a while, but it's not really helping at all. However, the membrane is membered by a defined by a definite number of members, not infinite. And whether it is a sphere that is, you know, very smooth, that's a very high frequency system. Think of let's take a mountain growing, right, out of the earth. And now on the top of the mountain, a crack is born somewhere in the rock face, and the water runs in, and the water freezes and crystallizes into these various structures, expanding and breaking the stone. Now the beginning of the travel of the journey of that stone is a very rugged one. It has very few corners, very few edges, very few faces, stone faces. If I say face, it's more in the term or in the sense of facet, right? So if we have a small eye, that's one eye. But if we have a face, that's a facet eye. It's a lot of small eyes that make up a face, right? So in the stone case, we can't really see into it anymore, but the eyes are there nevertheless. Now, if the stone moves on downhill from where it was born as such, it will encounter another and another and another. And it will run with the water. The water will carry it down into the ocean. And along the way, every time this stone meets another, it's gonna knock off a corner. And when that happens, a few more corners take its place. And by that process, we begin to get a smooth shape, right? And the longer this journey continues, the smoother our sphere, which is to say, the higher the number of corners on it. So high indeed that we don't see them anymore. But if I do have a sphere like that, one that is, well, here, maybe one of these, it's a tiny one, but if I get it close to the camera, that's fine. That's a smooth kind of sphere. And to everyone's eyes, this looks perfectly spherical, unless we begin taking a closer look with a microscope, and then it blows up in our face that it actually is still a very rough structure. So that is what we I think should keep in mind as we follow these pathways. And remember that this membrane in its completeness is generating something in its heart, which is the center of gravity, right? So that's where we have, in the terminology of Bucky, a sphere being a definite number of corners or points in the membrane, all approximately the same distance of approximately the same place in the middle. I'm paraphrasing, but that's about what he said. So that keeps the mind open to include all kinds of shapes as spheres, right? Like, for instance, the Earth. People are very, very strict in saying that the Earth isn't a sphere. Not in the sense of it's flat. I mean, some do that. And if we want to go down that hill, which I don't really want to go into now, indeed, the concept of three-dimensional space actually has as one of its consequences that the frame of reference, the ground we build our house upon, necessarily needs to be flat. So the three-dimensional thinking is actually an artifact of flat plane thinking, where the Earth isn't a sphere. That's not what I mean now, because what I speak of right now is that the notion that the Earth isn't a sphere because it isn't perfect, right? It's a spheroid. It's of a sphere kind of shape. And that, I think, it's a valid discernment in the language. You know, language is so beautiful because it allows us to make these minute tunings to meanings, right? But really, I think the Earth is a very perfect sphere because any sphere in its place will be a little squished, because that's taking into account the integrity of space-time around it, the entire complex of gravitational pull and drawing between the sun and the planets and the moon and basically the rest of universe also, right? There's no one is exempt from this omni-integrative force that is gravity, which Stephen always reminds us is metaphysical gravity. No, love is metaphysical gravity. That's what Bucky said. So remembering that gravity isn't really just pulling us down, but it is really as the surface tension on a soap bubble. It's pulling us all around the Earth in this case. And the sum total of all the members of the Earth drawing together around the Earth is an effect that goes into the center. So, in other words, I've just recently thought of the word somebody, not some, but some, right? So the Earth is a somebody, and the sum of the whole membership is manifest in the very center of gravity, which is the heart of this organism Earth that we can all point to as our common heart. Okay, so that's a sphere, but really a single sphere, and Bucky was very clear on this, a single sphere on its own wouldn't know that it is. It couldn't be. And in Bucky's understanding, life comes down to awareness. And for awareness to be, we need other. We need one another. And I might point out in this place that actually in the English tongue, it's very beautiful that there is a deep resonance between other and outer. So in another way, we can understand that if my true identity is both my inside in and my outside, then my inside is myself and my outside is my other. And the first my other that I've ever met was my mother, right? And maybe then my father and my brother, and from there, any other. But every time we meet one another, we learn more about ourselves. So if you do have brought some spheres of your own, this would be a nice place to take one of them at least, so you get a grip on that. And then think about the membrane and the inside and the outside, and the fact that there is somebody there. And even if we only looked at the center of gravity of this somebody, it is still the center of a body. So the very point that the Greek said doesn't exist really, it does, because it's already somebody. And you know, in school, when we do draw that first point and they tell us, or on the blackboard, and the teacher says it's not there, that's contradicting our sensual experience, because our senses tell us it's there, I can point at it. There's a point, I can point it out. And if I take a microscope, it suddenly becomes vast, right? So it's not without dimension, it's not without somebodiness. And the same is true for the stars in the sky. Taking a telescope, they become vast. So that's something to keep in mind. And now, since we have that first sphere, let's see if we can find a second. And as we have these two come together, they will probably orbit one another. That's the way of things. And this is where I really like Shrikant's ideas of the orbs, because that speaks of the orbiting. The orbit is something that the orb is doing with one another. Now, if these two do have a relationship and they do orbit, their relationship is always a linear one. However far apart they may be, it's a line that connects their centers of gravities. And when they meet and touch, the line is as short as it gets. And we have these two spheres running wild, running around one another like so. But now they are not two spheres anymore. They are a pair of spheres, right? So you see they can move freely around one another and nothing stops that. But if we only had these two and nothing else to relate them to, we couldn't say anything else about their relationship other than there's a line between them. There's a line drawn from one to the other. And this is a line that is not going to infinity. It's not straight, and it's most certainly not a divisive line. It's not dividing one side of the spectrum from the other, but it is doing the exact opposite. It is connecting two hearts. All right, we will take a look at the lines more clearly in a second, but let's stick with these for now, because I see some of you have them with you, and I like to see that. So let's take a third, right? Now the third one comes into the play, and you know, as long as they only meet in one, like so, they can still freely move around one another, and nothing much happens other than before. There's just linear relationships, except between the two that meet in the one, there's an angle, and this is a free angle. It's not defined at all. It's completely free to be what it wants to be until they all meet. And now something special happens, because again, we have a whole manifest. We had a whole pair of spheres, and now we have a whole triangle. An eye between them. We can look through in between those spheres. We can see, well, what appears to be front and back is the same thing inside out. Or, you know, again, like the finger pointing two ways, this eye is looking both ways, right? And we also note that these three make a plane. And you may be familiar with this, because if you've ever experienced a four-legged piece of furniture as a chair or a table or a cupboard or something, unless the very ground they rest upon is as even as it could be, this four-legged is going to walk away. It's going to move, it's going to rock. There's very little we can do about that other than putting something on the one leg so that it also has contact. However, if you've ever tried a tripod or a three-legged stool, you will note they don't rock. They may tip over, yes. If we move the center of gravity out over the edge of the base triangle, it tips. But it cannot rock, however uneven the ground. Because between the three legs, where they meet the ground, we always have a triangle, and that is always a plane. So while the square that we identify a plane with in the geometry that we've been taught does not hold true to opening a plane, it cannot. A triangle very much does. And every time we have a triangle, we have a plane. That's a great thing to have to begin with. And we have a common center of gravity between the three, and we still have them move, both as a unit in unity, but also like this. I don't know if I can make this happen too well, but you can see how they can all together involute or evolute. They can turn, as this one here, just like this torus. They can go one way or the other, all together. So they're still free to move in that regard. That, again, is good to keep in mind. And now we've come to the fourth of our spheres. And this one comes in and meets one first. And we have the same game again. Free to move around. Free angle. Linear relationship. Now it meets a second one. And with that, we get two triangles. So if I can hold this just the right way, it's a pair of eyes. I can look through both at once, right? With both of my eyes. So that's a pair of eyes. It's not a square like this. If they were like this, they would always want to come closer together so that they all meet and triangulate. And that's a pair of eyes. And the pair of eyes is like a hinge. And they can roll into one another so that in the end, the fourth lands in the nest that the three others provide, sitting on the very eye that they opened between them. And with that, we have come full circle for the first time, because now we have a body. Why? Because this body is membered by this membrane of spheres, and it has a boundary with that membrane, binding the inside of this to its outside. Yes? So this is the first instance that we have created a sphere. And it's the minimum sphere. It's the minimum system, the minimum body. If Bucky speaks of system, it's the same thing as a body. If we think of a body as that binding inside and outside together. And this is very much doing that. So now if you do have these with you, take a good look at this, because this is where spherical thinking begins to go into the next level, because we're not thinking of a single sphere anymore, but we've now grown a sphere in its own right. And again, this is only just the beginning. There is so many things, so many structures and bodies that can grow from here. And just to bring this also up, because this storyline that I've just shared with you is something that Bucky also shared. There's videos of him doing it. And he also always likes to point out, and I think it's worthwhile to do so, that if we do take these like so, you know, a single sphere is very rare that it's hanging out on its own. It's much more likely that we have two pairs of spheres, like so. And when these meet, they do not meet in an orthogonal plane, but they meet with a rotation at play. And this rotation is at the heart of any orbit, and it's at the heart of any relationship between moving bodies. And in synergetics, we call it precession. And it is where the right angle comes to play. But the right angle is not static, it's the dynamic relationship. And if we do bring these together with that precession, right, if we do turn them like so, we do get the pairs meeting and making the four eyes between them. And just to show how intimately familiar you are with that, if you've ever extended your hand to another and they grabbed it, this notion, this motion, this interlocking like that, that's the very same thing as those one sphere, two spheres, right? 1, 2, and here's another 2, and they come together like this. And between them, they open up a structure of space-time. So every time we hold on to something, make a knot or shake hands or do any of these things, we are indeed manifesting a forest between us. So with that, maybe this was another cycle, or rather perhaps I do show, now that we've got that kind of fresh on our minds, I can show you the same thing with an emphasis on the lines.
Let's do one thing.
Yes.
Struppi. Let's, this is very profound. Because this is like the core of everything, what you've described right now. I want to give a chance for people to make comments.
Yes.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So folks, if you'd like to make any comments or ask any questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. We'll start with Evanik.
Struppi, thank you so much for that. I think you're right. Playing with the spheres really does help you see it on a whole dimensional level. I think it's kind of like the hand-eye coordination that makes it connect, and also just the action.
You've got some there, right? Can you show us?
Yeah, I have oranges.
I would love everyone to show their 4 eyes
and
that they've got.
I have 3 more off camera, but these are the things I've been using.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'll get some better ones, but this is what I had for right now. When I saw the message yesterday, I was like, I have oranges. So, so thank you for that. And I thought about it when you were talking about the spheres interconnecting and, like these orbiting around each other. And I was thinking of the term interdependence. So it's kind of like keeping, and if you're talking about in terms of human beings, it's keeping your own uniqueness and the own special thing that makes you, yet coming together and being a part of another person, or in a friendship or a relationship with another person, or just working with another person. And you guys could orbit around each other, and you guys can like be interdependent and kind of like collaborate with each other and get that line together. So this helped me understand it a lot more than I did when I first started studying Bucky, which I knew nothing about until 52 Living Ideas. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and that is actually, just to reply to that, what you spoke there, what was it? I'm feeling that the mate wants to run out, so I need to go out in a second for just a moment. But you speak to the relationship between two, where one brings their identity, their integrity, their uniqueness, and then there is some uniqueness that happens between that one and the other, right? It's that center of gravity between the two. And I lost my thought. Maybe it'll come back.
That's
but
all
I
right.
think I will just take a short break. I can think more freely when I don't feel the river calling. So
absolutely.
I'll be back in a second.
Wonderful. So folks, I have to tell you, I have to show you this. So I went, Rupali called me yesterday, and she was in the neighborhood in New Jersey. Usually never go leave Manhattan, but Rupali was there. So I got a whole bunch of spheres of all kinds. Okay, so let me show you. And so I went to this store, Michael's, and I got a whole kinds of things. And then I said, okay, let me go to my local convenience store. Everybody has local convenience store on your block. For me, it is the Macy's, and Christmas was just done. So I have some of these as well. So I have got a whole bunch of things of various shapes, and we are trying to figure out how to make like this permanent structures out of it. So the 4 eyes out of it. So we have got like multiple size spheres. We tried to use glue. Then finally ended up using the toothpicks, which worked really, really beautifully. And I recommend toothpicks and foam balls as a way of quickly making something. Within 2 minutes. You can make something like this, and you can think of them as units. So I'm very excited about this process of making these things. And go ahead. Does anybody have anything else? So we're going to have Ella as soon as Struppi comes back. It's going to be Ella followed by Joe. But if anybody else wants to add anything, you're welcome to do that. I think it's also important relationship between your hand and these. Yes. Oh, marshmallows and peas to build a structure. Yes. Yes. But I really like these spheres which touch each other, because it gives you the reason why it is the shape it is, built into the shape itself. So, all right, Struppi is back. So it's going to be Ella followed by Joe. Ella.
Hi, thank you, Struppi, and thank you, Shrikant. Yeah, I just have a quick comment on where we left off, and that would be a good, sturdy foundation for relationship. And I know there is a psychotherapist, actually, he's a psychiatrist that I've read, and his name is Murray Bowen, Bowen, and he has family systems therapy, Bowenian systems therapy. And one of his concepts is about a two-person family unit is inherently unstable, and that you need the third person to alleviate the tension between the two. And that would mean that if you, I was wondering if we could relate this back to what you're demonstrating here in the models and the tension that comes with two, and how that might be alleviated, especially if the third person could be a mother, somebody's mother, or the other person's father, say with a married couple. How that alleviates the tension between the two units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella. Struppi, would you like to comment?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and I think it will come clear when we get to the very next leg of the story of that shifting our focus away from the spheres themselves to the connections between them, because then we can speak to the tension and the centers of gravity as they shift in relation to the number of members of the system.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Joe followed by Steve. Joe.
Yeah, so I was going to just have something very brief that's similar to what everybody's been asking regarding the connections, and I have a feeling that it'll probably be addressed next. But this idea, like I'm thinking of this in terms of, I understand this as a minimal structure. That became very clear to me as starting to understand putting these together. But I started to think about these in terms of graphs as well, and the connections, the edges that are connected. And when sometimes in graphs that you have directed graphs, and then you have bidirectional connections. And so when I was thinking about those in terms of like that those types of connections, that unhealthy connections would be directed graphs in certain ways, and because it'd be a structure that would not be moving, it would not be dynamic, but bidirectional graphs. And that's where I'm assuming the connections are coming in that we're talking about with the edges next. Is that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Next
All right.
up
Yeah.
is sorry, Joe. Go ahead. You're done. Okay. Thanks. Next up is Steve. Steve.
Okay. We're going to go to the oranges, but here's what I see. I love the magnets because the magnets attract each other in spite of my efforts. It's like they want to go together. And where an orange will fall apart and I've got to hold it together, where those foam balls, we got to take a toothpick and stick in there. These freaking magnets are magic. This is the universe. This is me. I am the universe. Bucky identified 13 me's in his cosmic hierarchy and related it to cosmos. But now here I am. I'm floating in space. This is to reaffirm what Struppi said. I'm floating in space. There's inside me and outside me. But so me is out here too. And I'm floating through space and I have no idea who I am. Can you imagine not talking to anybody? I mean, can you sing? There's nobody to listen to. Can you talk? There's nobody to understand your words. I'm just floating in space. And suddenly, here comes otherness. And boom, it's like I'm stuck. There I am, I'm attracted, and I can't get rid of the otherness. So there's outside and inside, there's outside and inside, and this straight line is actually not a straight line. It's an axis. Bucky called lines axes. And so now here I am in otherness, experiencing myself relative to the other. Now I can talk, I can sing, I can share, I can find out what I like, what I don't like. Otherness defines me. I define myself as I interrelate with otherness. So I just think that's really profound. Struppi talked about the center of gravity being the heart and mentioned that Bucky said that metaphysical gravity is love. Watch the movie Interstellar. The whole principle of gravity in Christopher Nolan's Interstellar is possibly gravity is love. It's one of the main themes, well, a subtle philosophical theme through in that movie. And there's a lot more here, but I'm so excited. I just thought I would share that much and pause.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. All right, Struppi, please go ahead.
Okay, I love the fact that we're moving along so fluidly that we're actually, you know, the questions that came up in the last presentation there are actually premonitions of what is now to come. And I was gonna use this moment to just put these magnets in here as a transition to move from the 4 oranges that we were looking at to this this other perspective on the whole thing, where we look at where we tune into the relationships.
Wonderful. Please take your time, because
awkwardly doing it.
No, it's actually wonderful to see you put it together, because you really need to know how it is put together to fully appreciate it. So wonderful. Well, the fun part is, if you don't know it yet, chances are you find other ways to put it together. Yes. And there's nothing wrong about those. It's just there is so many ways that these relevant relationships can emerge. And the way to kind of consider that, I think, is to realize that all of these relationships are possible, and they all come with integrity as long as they are triangular, right? If we keep that in mind, we will not necessarily get to the same answer to a question, but we will get to an answer that has its own integrity. So that, I think, keeps this game dynamic for everyone to find their own perspectives on these matters. And the magnets are indeed beautiful because they show this all naturally. And there is no reason or no way, basically, to force them together in a way that they don't want to be. But it also speaks to the way that we're conditioned to think, because we think one way it's clear, they are drawn together, right? Everyone knows the different poles of the magnets are drawn together. But we think that they push apart when we have the same poles coming together. And I think that's not true.
They're not pushing apart. They're actually drawing apart. It's just that as we move the same poles together so closely, the drawing apart of them, where the other sides of them want to get together so badly that they just don't allow these similar ones to meet. I think that gives more clearly an insight on what they do than thinking of that notion as, yes, these are pushing apart. And this is the first time I'm trying to wrap these together with the magnets here. It always takes a little longer to put things together than it takes to disintegrate them. But I'm doing this just to give us a place of connecting where we were just getting to with the looking at the very spheres, right? To a place where we take into consideration the relationships. But I'm struggling, and maybe they don't want to come together this way. But yes, let's do it without that. If I had if we had a lot more comments now, and I would have quietly done this on the side, I would have.
Struppi, it's wonderful to watch you do this. No issues.
It's all right. We'll look at this without the big spheres now. I made these particular ones in the very size and the scale where the connections between them are of the same length as these other straws that I'm using. So it's possible to connect them with a 4 eyes that draws them together. And then it is the very same thing as the magnets. So all these tensagrities that I'm drawing with a string running through beads or a string running through straws, which is the same thing really, all of them are identical to the magnets, just with the difference that the connections take a little longer to draw, but they also last longer. These are a lot more resilient and strong to play with. You know, I can do whatever I want to with this. I think you can hear perhaps the sound of this, and it's not gonna harm this. It's very difficult to harm these, and if they do get injured along the way, it's usually not, it doesn't take much to repair them. All right, but now let's go down the way that Steve was already showing us here, because yes, we can shrink our sphere down to this, and let's consider this the center of gravity of one of these bigger ones. All right, so we're not looking at the membrane of it right now, we're just looking at the heart of it. And as it meets with a second sphere, like this, now, if we have these membranes around them and they are this big, they can't, the centers of gravity can't touch like this, but they do connect with a vector, or again, I call it a finger, like this. Right, so now I've got my pair of spheres. And if we were to, I want to do this, but just so that we're absolutely clear what we're looking at here, I'm gonna add these two just so for a moment, because I think this may be a point where it's easy to consider this as an abstraction, but it isn't. I think it's crucial that we understand that synergetics allows us to shift our focus like this without going into abstractions, right? So now we can see the whole spheres around those centers of gravity. Yes, everyone can see them, I hope. Everyone agrees on their presence. And the reason these spheres, if we connect them with these vectors here, are exactly that size is because you see that vector is the diameter of one of these spheres. How come? Now, the reason is that from one center of gravity of one sphere here, this connection goes the radius of the sphere to the point where the spheres meet. That's one radius. And then there's a second radius into the heart of the other sphere. Yes? So 2 times the radius is identical with the diameter of a single sphere. So I want to make this clear. What I'm doing here is the same thing that we're doing on a piece of paper when we're doing classical geometry. We're drawing a line, and it starts at one point where we begin the line, and it stops at the point where we end the line. So we've just drawn this connection. And with that, we manifest, whether we ignore it or not, the presence of those 2 spheres. And in synergetics, there is much talk about events, event happenings, because every center of a sphere, every corner in one of these systems, every vertex of these is indeed a happening. There's something going on there. And that becomes ever more clear the more complex the structures grow. Like this one here is a good example. This is quite a complex structure. This is a 2-frequency vector equilibrium. There's a lot of things in that. And you can see how those corners here, where the fingers meet, the beads meet, there's those strings. You can see the string running through the corner. And it's one string running through the whole thing. It's the same string, one line going around all of these triangles. And as the fingers meet in a corner, there's critical proximity. The connection gets as close together as it could to just then go around the corner and pass by one another. And that is something, again, where we are talking about a completely different kind of understanding of geometry than what we think, because in this case, it is impossible for 2 lines to cross, right? 2 lines cannot intersect. They will always, in reality, they will cross like this. They can get very close and move past one another, but they will not intersect, because if there is somebody there already, then there is no room for another one in the very place at the very same time. Okay? All right, that's a lot of side notes. Let's look at this relationship again, because we've drawn this now, this connection, and we find this is a pair of spheres, and as such, it's a whole, right? We've used one whole sphere and complemented it with a second whole sphere, and we have a whole pair of spheres. Because every time we have a whole, we find there's a center of gravity. And right now, the center of gravity lies in the middle between the 2, in the place where the 2 membranes kiss. Now, if we call back the comment we just had about the family, it's not necessary that this is a relationship that is dysfunctional. This could very well be a very healthy relationship. It's just the environment in which we live, the manufactured reality in which we find ourselves, makes it incredibly hard to have healthy relationships. Just think, every time people meet, naturally they organize in a circle. They gather in a circle where we can meet eye to eye, and the circle can accommodate anyone. We can grow it bigger or smaller, however we need, and we have a center of gravity between us where we share our communion. But it is hard, if not impossible, to come together in a circle if the table that we're meeting on is a square one. And that is something, I have a lot to say about the squares and the cubes and about what they really are and what they really are not, which I don't really want to go too deep to today, because I think it's much more helpful if we focus in on what the spheres do first. But it is nevertheless important that we keep this in mind, that the fact that everything is normalized in squares and cubes is not without consequence at all. And it is, I think, very often the reason why a relationship like that pair of the two in a family, the parents, for instance, might be under tension in a way where it cannot resolve that. And usually it wouldn't be, the center of gravity wouldn't be here. It would be here or there, because one of them is taking up more room and not allowing for the other to be present. And this reciprocity. Oh, now I remember what I wanted to say about Eval. Oh, sorry,
Evanik.
Evanik, yes. What I wanted to say is that weird. Now I got the name and the thought has dissipated again. It's going to come in a second. I think we're very close to it, and it's like this cosmic fishing thing that Bucky spoke of. The fish keep running, touching my leg, and I try to hold on to them, and they just move on. Anyway, it will come back. Yes, so we are now in a place where the center of gravity is in the middle of these two, indicating clearly that this is a whole. And this finger is pointing both ways. It is very much connecting. It's a relationship that is not dividing anything. Now, if we do remember, after two spheres, we added a third, yes? So let us bring in a third sphere with a relationship. And let's see if it wants to get, oh yeah, it wants to draw to this corner. It might not want to grow together with this. See, these two draw apart, away from one another, but these two draw together. And here we have, and you may follow along with your oranges or spheres if you have them with you. Now we have the constellation with three spheres, where we could have them roll around one. And that looks like this. And we see each one on their own is still the same kind of relationship we had a moment ago, but now we have an angle between them. And what we have here is like a pair of levers, right? With a fulcrum in the middle. Like a pair of scissors or pliers. And we all know from experience that it is much easier to have control over the fulcrum on the ends of these levers than on the beginnings of them, on this side, right? So here in the end, we have no effort at all to hold this and manipulate it. And I'm not speaking manipulating in the sense of forcing it, but just manos, my hands are at play right now. All right, when these do move like that, and we do find these two extremities coming together and to meet, we grow our third connection up. That's not the way. Let's take the other side. There we go. All right. Same thing as before, free to move. But if this sphere here touches that one, they grow a connection. And without any effort at all, without any forcing, this gathers and members that triangle, that plane, that eye that we spoke to. And now we see why a triangle is structure, not a construct, not something that we add structure to, but it is structure, period. Because every member of this, the fulcrum here, the angle between these two levers is held in the place where it's the easiest to hold by that third finger. Yes? So this finger here holds that angle, this one holds that, and this one holds that. In other words, it's a self-regenerative system. Now, if we want to name this triangle with something more, and we want to say something about the fact that it is all the same, we usually call this equilateral or other things, but for a second, let's consider we're used to calling 90 degrees right angles. So this is all 60 degrees, which is inherently sort of the angle of structure, the original angle of structure, if we like. And I would like to offer the name of left angle for that, right? So the 60 degrees is a left angle, as 90 degrees is a right angle. And then this whole thing is a left angle, just as something else might be a rectangular business. All right. And here again, we have our plane, and we have something that can grow many which ways. But also note how this is a circle, because the relationships go full circle. And just as the 4 eyes is the minimum sphere out of spheres, so is the triangle the minimum circle, right? And another way we recognize again that we have grown a whole is that the center of gravity, we have again a common center of gravity grown by the whole, which is in the very middle here, in the center of that triangle, which right now I cannot hold on to, not without help. But yes, another whole has come to be. And so we've come here already, and I mentioned that those 3 spheres can still involute and evolute, which is, you wouldn't see if I did that with this model, because the spheres don't have any markers on them. So let's move on to adding the 4th sphere, the 4th orb. And here is one. And there comes our connection. And we have, again, our linear connection, our relationship in a line, with the angles to the others. So if this sphere I'm holding on to meets another, perhaps this, no, the other, this one, there. Here we have our pair of eyes, yes, which is like a butterfly. It flies away if we don't hold on to it. And note, this almost looks like a square, one could think, if only this connection here was a little longer, or even not there, right? If it was like this, we would think of it as a square, but then there is no integrity at all. There is no shape there. The only reason it could be a square was when it was held in place by triangles. And rather than going the extra mile of normalizing this thing, where we do have the distinction, the artificial distinction of this being a normal, because it's at right angles, which would logically mean that this connection, the root of the square, the origin of the square and what gives it strength and holds it, that would be abnormal, right? If this is normal, then that is abnormal, and it is indeed rendered irrational by current conventions of geometry. No need for that. This is all triagonals, not diagonals, but triagonals, all the same length. And now we finally get to where we have that 4th sphere touching the 1st, if we like. And note, the numbers aren't really that important here, because that's another thing about this thinking. We don't need a firm foundation for something that comes with integrity. It wouldn't mind if it sits on this or on that or on any other of it. There is no up and down, there is in and out and around. And here we've just found the very 4 eyes we were looking for. And we can see clearly now how much room there is in here, right? And again, I cannot hold on to the center of gravity right now, but it has one. And I do know a way to hold on to it, where here, let me bring back our little cube from earlier, which now has transformed from a transform into a construct, where it is now stable because it's all triangles in there. However, if I disconnect these, we see that really what held the cube was the four eyes in the middle of it. And at the same time, what I only recently found was that the cube thing actually allows me to hold the center of gravity of that four eyes, to grasp that and have it as such here. Right? So now, again, another whole. Center of gravity is there. The members are there. Actually, a membrane is there. And we've never left the holes behind, right? We've never gone into parts. We've never had to disintegrate anything. We've just been bringing holes together, minding the gap and the hole. All right. That's, I think, the next circle
Wonderful.
to
So
go
here
over.
is what I was thinking, Struppi.
Yes.
I want to give a chance for people to comment on this.
Yes.
And would you be willing to come in 1 week from now on January 8th at 1 p.m. again to
Of
continue?
course.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So that allows people to firstly to comment now at length as they want.
Yes.
Folks, this is your final chance to comment. Just go ahead and we'll do comments first. Then if you have questions, we can do questions later. And then we're going to continue this, okay? I think Struppi has done such a magnificent job of just putting the basic concepts down. And they are so radically different from the traditional way of thinking. And he has, I think, this is just brilliant, okay? I just love it. So please go ahead and would love to, you know what, let's intersperse questions, but let's keep the answers also fairly short. Go ahead.
Just before, because now I think I've caught back onto held onto that fish
Okay.
that I was.
Okay.
Yes, because Evanik spoke of interdependence. And I've had a beautiful conversation. Some of us were present there, Mark and Stephen, if I'm not mistaken, with the River Now Collective, where I was so into interdependence. You know, I was breaking a lens or whatever the phrase is for that. However, I was made aware of the fact that interdependence still has dependence in it. And maybe that isn't what I meant. So I looked into that. Where does that word come from? I do that very often. And I found dependence has to do with pendence, which is the hanging. And dependence means to hang off of something. And there is a hierarchy written into that word. However, if we're speaking integrally, as with these terms, there is no hierarchy there. There is no one is above the other. So there is no dependence, not even an interdependence here. But what I found, playing a little, was compendence. And there's already the compendium, which is the only way we use that word. A compendium being a collection of thoughts or whatever. But compendence, if we take that word by its own meaning, says the hanging together without that hierarchy. And I, for one, have become aware that life, as I recognize it, in all our kinship, is a play of compendence. Yes, all life is related, and it is healthier if all of it is present. But it does not necessarily need this one for all the others to be there. However, all may be healthier if that one is around, right? This is not to say that we should not care for our kin and for our compendence, rather to recognize that we're neither above nor below, but in the middle of it.
Wonderful, Struppi. And I also love the way in which you are looking at words, because what I have found is that when you dig into the words, in the history of words, you actually find that the four eye that is there at the core of things that used to be there, And that has been substituted, the way in which people are used, with these boxes, which don't have and which lose the meaning, the original meaning. So wonderfully put.
Yes.
All right. So folks, now feel free to make your comments, take your time, make your comments, questions that you may have. Would love to hear from you. We're, this is beginning of the Bucky series, and I don't think that I could have imagined a better beginning to the Bucky series. So let's go with Evanik, Rupali, and Joe. Evanik.
First of all, Struppi, that was beautiful. Like, this whole thing is beautiful. So I have a couple of thoughts. For this whole presentation, and even the presentation I heard the last time, I like the connection between spiritual, physical, and mental. When you were working with the triangles, you didn't force anything. You just let it connect, which to me means like letting nature happen. When something didn't naturally connect with another, oh gosh, I forget what you used for that stick, not the spear, but when the stick didn't connect to the spear, and I don't know if that's the term you
The
used.
finger, I think.
The finger,
yes.
And did not connect to the spear, did not want to. There was no forcing of it. And I think a lot of times we kind of want to force reality. We want to manipulate things into what we want.
Yeah.
And
control.
this helps. Yeah. And so this, seeing it in physical form, seeing that it's better to just let it connect where it wants to go is great. So I just love that. And then the last part I wanted to talk about is compendence. I love that word. It's such a beautiful word. And I think it's so much better because it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have that hierarchy. It doesn't put a person above you, and it doesn't put a person below you. You're partners. You're naturally connecting with each other. Your thoughts are connecting with each other. And, even if your thoughts don't connect with each other, your thoughts may connect with someone else, and maybe that's your path. We talked about that the other night, and I think it kind of like is interwoven. Like, if this isn't your path, that's great. Go over here, look, discover, figure it out, and then go naturally towards your path instead of like forcing yourself into a path that isn't meant to you. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad path or a wrong path. It just doesn't work for you. So thank you so much for this presentation. I thought it was amazing.
Thank you, Evanik. Next up is going to be Rupali, Joe, and Ella. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to make your comments or ask your questions. Rupali, go ahead.
Struppi, thank you for this wonderful journey from a simple shape to the universe and back to the shape. Buckminster Fuller always used to talk about universal truths. And what you showed us through these shapes is that there are these universal truths and there is integrity. And what we can learn from that, the relationship between the whole and its parts. It was just a beautiful, folding and unfolding, going out, coming back in. You made this whole conversation just flow. It was really mesmerizing. And I just feel that, through your explanation, you were able to show us the beauty in math, in geometry, in life, in the universe, and that we are all a part of it. So, as Evanik said, the spiritual, the physical, the intellectual, the social aspects, you just brought it all together. And wow, to start the series. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupali. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Ella. Joe.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement as well. I mean, you were so clear with your thoughts and the way you moved the shapes and manipulated the shapes that it started to become more clear to me. Some of the things that even the connections that you made, that how the question that Ella had brought up with the relationship between two nodes, if you will. And I know that's probably not the right word, but how that may not be stable in an unhealthy environment. And basically Buckminster Fuller talked about how to reform the environment as a way of actually trying to get us to think differently and see things differently. I'm also having my biggest takeaway is understanding the structural integrity of the shapes themselves. By putting them together, you can start to see very clearly, and I said this earlier, the minimal amount that's needed to make a stable structure. And then you look at every other structure differently. You look at homes differently, and I think we'll probably get into this tomorrow with the modular homes, or the way homes are being built. But that is mind-blowing to me, is that once you start putting these shapes together, you start to see where the connections can be made, and then what connections don't need to be made as well. That's just as important as understanding what is. The one that, and I need to go back to and listen to this video again, but you made a relationship or a reference to how it relates to procession. And I need to go back and listen to that, but that was the only part that I was kind of missing on a little bit. So anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for launching this series. It's fantastic, and it's been a great experience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Ella. And if anybody else wants to comment or ask questions, go ahead and type ! Ella.
Sure. My observations I've learned a few things, and sort of, first of all, your presentation was very calm and very open and very informative. So it therefore allowed me to open up and think and reflect. And, I would just thought of David Bohm and how he says it's important to observe your own thought when you can, so that, you take away the boxes, the squares, the pre-formations of ideas and things about people, places, and things, and open yourself up, as the structures that you have presented today also do. So try to observe one's own thought and not react, and sit with it, and then observe other people's thoughts. And if they sit with it, they're observing, you're observing them observing, and so forth and so on. I sort of applied that to the whole model that you presented here, because it opens up that type of thought. And it is great. Thank you for commenting on the relationship aspect. I found that very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Ella. Next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead.
This thing with the magnets implies some work that's been done in terms of self-organizing systems that as a way of classifying complicated phenomena. It goes back to how something like the COVID-19 virus, for example, finds the right place in the host molecule to modify in kind of a very complicated text editing system. The magnets cause things to migrate and attract each other, and similarly, there's that kind of attraction in carbon atoms. Now, in terms of synergy, there's a guy named Hermann Haken in Germany. Have you that's been playing with that stuff? He's a 90-year-old physicist who is an emeritus professor from Erlangen. Have you run into that name in your or some of the work that David Bohm, which Ella mentioned? Have you run
Yeah.
into some of that work that fits into this in terms of classification of systems and of creating self-organizing systems?
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Go ahead, Struppi.
Yeah, it's good that you bring that up. I I can't say much about Bohm. I haven't really looked into that realm, but when I got into synergetics and first had a budding a budding understanding, I was very much drawn to everything that could have a relationship to it. So I looked into Haken's synergetics, and my first looking through, I found not a single triangle, and I was a bit disappointed, and I thought maybe it's not really talking about the same, because I think if it was, there was no way not to mention triangles. I think really if we were to identify the singular quality of Bucky's thinking that makes him distinct from all the rest of people that I've ever heard of and known, I think it is the radical openness of Bucky's mind to go with his own sense of integrity, which led him to the triangle, and then to begin to grasp and understand what the triangle is and what that opens. And I think everything that Bucky ever did, all the Dymaxion inventions and all the great things, really are just applications out of a vast universe of possible applications of the triangles. So I don't, I can't really comment on Haken. I've never read him. I only read the first page, and there was like, he spoke about lasers and masters and slaves, and that was when I was out. That kind of language is just, it's like the magnet drawing away, I felt drawn away from that. And I mean, there is still some similar languaging within Bucky's synergetics, where I feel his words, coming from his background as an industrialist and all these things, has a bias too. For instance, with Kirby Erner, a lot of Kirby's interest is what Bucky called the cosmic hierarchy, which is, to make it very short, to understand the clear and natural relationship in terms of quanta or volume, with this as the unit of volume, that then shows us that if this is 1, then this one here, which I'll just put together quickly, this one, the 8 eyes, which I showed you earlier in that dance, this one has a volume of 4 quanta, while the next biggest, it's always good if I'm speaking while I'm doing this. Yeah, anyways, I'll put this together in a bit, and I'll show you that this has more volume, while the one that is hanging here holding onto the earth, that's the dozen 8 eyes. And you see, it is in the same scale as this 4 eyes. And that tells me that when this is a unit 1 in terms of volume, a quantum volume of 1, and this big thing has 1,006 times that volume, plus some golden ratio rest. So, there is a way in which these structures are nested in one another and in which they relate very naturally and organically, where we can not only quantify space-time, but we can actually qualify it. We can say that this kind of structure, this kind of system has such and such properties and qualities which are distinct and unique and different than the others, which opens up an understanding of shape and form that is a lot more useful than a uniform as the box, where all we ever do is boxes, big ones and small ones, but we never do a small shape, we do a small box. Whereas we could make a small shape. And you see now this 8 eyes here is also of the same scale as the 4 eyes. Oops. It's a bit close with the headphones on. Without the headphones, it would be very nice and cozy. But you see, if this is 1, then the four quanta of this is already big enough to hold my head. While if I took this one and let me drop our little Earth, I don't think it will mind. Come out and play. Let me go in there. Okay. All right. So this is exactly 5 times the material that it takes me to make that 4 eyes here. 5 times the number of fingers. But the volume of this is 1,006 times that, plus some. So if you want to translate that into numbers you're more familiar with, that's 18 times the volume, but only 5 times the amount of members, which goes to show how we actually find ourselves faced with or looking at a whole spectrum of shapes, all with their unique use and applicability to certain needs. And I think we've been rendered sort of analphabetic, illiterate when it comes to shape, because we've been taught in a uniform, which isn't real. When the beauty of universe is that it is polyform, and there is always a full spectrum that we can choose from, right? We're never stuck in one corner and have to only do this one thing and force the world to fit it. If we have this vast playground, and really those 3, the 4 eyes, 8 eyes, and 1,008 eyes that I showed you in the beginning as members of that dance, they're the basic shapes. You know, there is so much they can grow into, but this is the basics. And just knowing these 3, really knowing them intimately as kin, brings us to a very, very different place than where we are now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Struppi. Next up is Joe. Folks, anybody else, if anybody else wants to comment or ask questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Joe, go ahead.
You know, the thought just escaped me, actually, so forgive me.
All right, you can always come back.
Okay.
All right, if anybody else, give me just a second. Hold on. Next is Ella. Go ahead and make whatever quick comments you have. Oh, just a second. I have to unmute. Hold on. Yes, go ahead, Ella.
Yes, Struppi, I have a question. In the family situation we were discussing prior, is there an inherently unstable number? If, you know, through remarriage or a certain number of children or whatever. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, I can. And my answer is no, there isn't. As long as the family is a whole, which means, to my mind, that it is a place where every member of the family is recognized as such, right? And this comes back to, I spoke earlier of how the shape of the table influences the way we can meet, right? And it is speaking, it says a lot that only in the last ditch effort, when the wars are waging, do politicians meet around a round table. That should have been the first place they meet, not the last, right? And the same goes for a family, right? Even a pair of people, if they don't come together thinking, you know, having only an abstraction, an abstract idea of what the other is, but actually meeting so that there is the room in between the two for the union of the two, the unity of the two to come into play, and then be recognized and felt and spoken to by both. That is already stable, and it's always gonna grow more stable the more connections and points we add to the system. It's not that there is a number or something where suddenly the family becomes dysfunctional. It's really more, I think, that the way we have been taught to perceive the world is one that is disintegrative, where the lines that are inherently relational are thought of as divisions, right? Where everyone has to choose their side of the line. You're either for or against. And that is a very diminished modus to operate under, because I mean, I've only recently had a very lucid experience of this with a kid, the one who lives with us here, where we were in a situation actually because of this very model. I put some small wheels on it, which were 2 little dozen 8-eyes on an axis, and I made it into a model of a bike trailer, because you can actually fold it together and it's much smaller. And anyways, I showed it to her and she was like, "Whoa, this is awesome. I want to have it. I want to play with it with my puppets." And I was like, my mind was set, because I wanted to go another place later in the day and I wanted to take it with me. So I thought, I said, "You can't have it now. I can make you another one sometime, or I can offer you this or that or whatever." And it was no good. She wanted this and nothing else, right? And she was getting into a conditioned reflex of, oh, the grown-up doesn't understand me. And then it escalated into this conflict, right? There was no compendence there. There was no coming together. And eventually it got out of hand. I was like, "I have enough of this. Either you leave now, or," and I never got to "or." She was out of the door, and I felt like somebody had spilled a bucket of cold water over me. And I stood there and I thought to myself, that was stupid. Why in the world would I only offer 2 options? Why would I open this either or situation? Where is the third point? And I thought, well, actually, I don't need it right now. I'm going only in a couple of hours. She might have gone to bed by then, you know. So I went after her and caught her just as she was crying to her mom. And I offered her that third option of, you take it for now and you bring it back when you go to bed, or I take it when I need it. And I think I really was able to break through all of those conditioned reflexes that have us habituated in a way of constant conflict, right? Where we never meet one another because we're always so hellbound on the one thing we want or the other that we don't, that we overlook the third and fourth and fifth point of view and sixth and so forth, where we can find common ground. And the truth about the common ground is, it is the great round, right? Ground is the great round. And I think there is a lot of room for everyone in that. It's just regaining our senses, regaining our integrity as the whole of ourselves that is universe, where we can meet one another with compassion. And that, just as a final thought on that, speaks again of geometry, because we call the tools of geometry one of two namings. There is either calling it compass and more or less straight edge, or calling it ruler and divider. And those two are vastly different in what they say, because a compass has its name from compassion, from the fact that it encompasses, it fathoms, as our fathom is the length from one fingertip to the other. We can embrace something, we can wrap our mind around anything we can fathom. We can encompass, we can hold onto and hold close and hold dear. While the way we have been, again, conditioned and habituated does not even allow for that, because it's all about division and ruling and who makes the rules. And it goes so far that our sciences now even speak of the natural laws. There is no one else in the universe except humanimals who has the concept of a law. And in Bucky's terms, these are principles, generalizable principles. They are at play at any given time, everywhere in the universe. They are omni-interaccommodative and always complement one another. But they're not rules, they're not laws, because you can't break them. And the very definition of a law is, it is something put in place to prohibit a behavior that one wants not to see. So it's an utterly unfit term for what is gravity, or all these beautiful processes of life that animate matter.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Struppi. Next up is Rupali. Rupali, go ahead.
Thank you, Struppi, for that explanation. I wanted to ask you how you discovered Bucky, how you came across his principles, and how you learned to play with the tools that you just showed us.
Well, I kind of spoke to this earlier today, but it's always good to return to a storyline and pick it up again, because indeed I was lucky insofar as that I've never unlearned how to play. I've been taught to play in many, many ways, and that is playing by heart. And that kind of had me always looking for that thing that I felt intuitively that was missing. You know, I was writing songs for a long time where I write like, why are we this? Why are we doing this? What is going on? What is, you know, that kind of restlessness and just sense of something is amiss. And it was through the directions of permaculture where I felt a lot of resonance with what I had been doing up till then, because I recognized that the traditional music and dance I was doing and the capoeira and all of these things were permaculture, not in the gardening sense, but in a very real sense nevertheless. And within the permaculture, there's a practice of growing geodesic greenhouses, mostly. So I built something like this, true frequency, a little more complex than this, in my mother's garden one day out of bamboo sticks that I tied together. And that experience taught me that this was very much unlike all the constructions I had done until then. And I can tell you, I've been brought up in boxes too. All my books are boxes, all my paintings and images and drawings, everything came on rectangular papers, just as everything normally does. So I wasn't, you know, I wasn't coming at this thinking, oh, the triangle. But it was the triangles that spoke to me, and they spoke to my heart, and I said, look, there is something here, go deeper. And that's what I did. I looked very deep into synergetics and all that comes with that. And, you know, nowadays my books look like this. And rather than having squares in them, square 1 and 2 and whatever, this one, for instance, has all these little triangles in there. This is a so-called isometric grid, right? And once one begins to recognize these things and notice them, they show up everywhere. And the beauty about the triangles is they are all triangles come with integrity, and they're all integral to the way of the spheres. And they go with all of these principles that we spoke to. So whatever we find anywhere in the world where someone has done something with a triangle before, we can take that and know that it goes together with all the rest, right? And that is a beautiful place to be.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe.
So it came to me, my comment, and it actually, one of the things that Struppi has been able to do here is actually show us how these shapes work within nature very clearly, and delineate between that and what we impose on nature. That's been very, very apparent, just the way you were actually talking about, and using your language and studying the words actually helped with seeing that. So that was one takeaway that I wanted to express, because we talk a lot of times about how, whether it be Louis Sullivan, how these shapes are, are derived out of nature, and how our structures are derived out of nature. But you made it very clear as to what is natural and what is the unnatural, and the box thinking, and how boxes actually create an unnatural way of approaching the world. So thank you for that. I wanted to extend my gratitude for that. That became very clear.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. So, firstly, Struppi, this was just wonderful playing with you here. Okay, what you showed was just amazing. I mean, this is just incredible. I could not have thought of a better way to start off this series. Okay, I think we are off to a great start, and I'm delighted that you're coming back next week. So folks, I've not announced the meetup yet, but it's going to be just 1 week from today, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, Struppi will be back to continue the presentation, because I wanted to make sure, we want to make sure that, this is not a one-way dialogue for anybody. We are all trying to learn from each other. And I was just amazed by all the comments that came from everybody. And that's how we're going to, kind of learn together and proceed, because each person brings in their own perspectives and adds to everything. So thank you so much. And that'll be January 8th. I want to tell you, tomorrow, somebody very special, Tom Miller, has agreed to let me visit his studio to show me all the work he's been doing on modular design. He's the theme, Joe right now talked about liberating from the box. The theme is going to be liberating from the box. And how do you do that? How do you, he says that what he's trying to do is that he's trying to develop a periodic table of natural shapes, natural forms. So don't miss that. I'm going to actually visit his studio along with Becky, and we will first have him demonstrate everything that he has, and then I'm going to open it up for comments and questions. So that's going to be at 12 p.m. tomorrow, 12 p.m. tomorrow Eastern time. Don't miss that. And on January 8th, it's going to be Struppi at 1 o'clock, and Daniel Friedman about the parallels between Blake and Bucky at 9 o'clock. All right. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm just grateful. It's an amazing community, to be able to have a discussion like this. So Struppi, any closing comments?
Indeed. I thought I'd actually bring in Lao Tzu one last time, because
please,
they hold a special place in my heart, and I have been fortunate to be introduced to the Tao Te Ching in the words of Ursula K. Le Guin.
That's my okay. I just want to tell
Yes.
you, Struppi, we did, I think, about 200 hours of meetups on Tao Te Ching.
Yes.
Everybody read all, I have read probably 25 different. That is definitely my favorite translation in terms of its poetry and how it really speaks. Go ahead.
Yes. And when I read it, I was already well on the way of the spheres. And I recognized a lot of this stuff in there. And I just want to, I think this occasion sort of calls for it almost, because verse number 1,002 or 14 would be celebrating mystery. Now listen to this. Look at it, nothing to see. Call it colorless. Listen to it, nothing to hear. Call it soundless. Reach for it, nothing to hold. Call it intangible. Triply undifferentiated. It merges into oneness. Not bright above, not dark below. Never, oh, never can it be named. It reverts, it returns to unbeing. Call it the form of the unformed, the image of no image. Call it unthinkable thought. Face it, no face. Follow it, no end. Holding fast to the old way, we can live in the present, mindful of the ancient beginnings. We hold the thread of the Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you, Struppi, and thank you, everybody else. See you soon. Bye, everybody. Have a nice evening.